I'm Evelyn, 34 years old, and I never thought an old music box clock would become the witness to the day my own family pushed me into the spiral of betrayal. There was no warning, no sign at all. The doorbell rang, and right after that, only the cold eyes of two policemen swept straight into the house. I still remember clearly the moment my mother set down her teacup and whispered softly, "Evelyn, you understand, it's for the family." Then the click of the handcuffs echoed, like a blade locking shut the last bit of trust one had left for them. Even Lucky, my loyal dog, only lowered his head onto my foot, as if he already knew I was about to be left alone. Before I tell you what was truly hidden inside that drawer, leave a comment to let me know where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever felt turned into a sacrifice inside your very own home. That morning carried the faint smell of toasted bread in the kitchen and the offbeat melody from an old AM radio, playing the same tune I once heard my mother hum when I was little. No one, not even me, could have predicted that in just 1 hour, this house, the one that had sheltered me from storms, would become a battlefield and switch sides. I took Lucky out to the garden as usual. The early air still clung to a misty chill, my feet pressed against the cool, damp earth, and Lucky turned back to me with bright eyes and a wagging tail. I thought today would be just another peaceful morning. The phone rang, Grandpa calling, only to remind me to wind the music box clock hanging on the wall. He said, "It doesn't just count time, Evelyn, it keeps the rhythm of the whole house." I laughed and promised I'd do it as soon as I came back inside. But when I pushed open the wooden door leading into the kitchen, the first sight made my heart pound. Two police officers standing tall at the porch, hands resting on their belts, eyes cold and calm as if they had memorized the script. My mother, in her cream sweater, welcomed them inside with the gentle tone of a hostess at a tea party, showing not the slightest sign of surprise or alarm. Everything moved too smoothly. They walked down the hallway, turned left as though it had been rehearsed, and stopped right at the bottom drawer, the one where I kept Grandpa's handwritten letters from long ago. One of the officers pulled it open, and instead of the letters, a clear zip bag appeared, filled with white pills. I froze. I knew that wasn't mine. But before I could say a word, my mother stepped forward, her eyes shimmering with tears yet her voice steady, like a witness giving testimony. "She's been keeping this bag for weeks." My father, standing behind her, nodded lightly, firmly, and sparingly, as if signing off on a document he had already read. In that instant, I heard the music from the clock echo faintly inside my head. But instead of its familiar tune, it sounded distorted, like someone had twisted the rhythm out of place. Time no longer moved as it always had. It stumbled, fractured. I looked at my mother, searching her eyes for a trace of warmth, but all I found was a wall of ice. Her words cut through me like a blade, "Admit it, and it will be easier for everyone." That was the most cutting line of verdict without a courtroom, sealed by the consensus of the people I called family. My hands trembled so hard that the brass winding key slipped from my fingers and hit the wooden floor with a hollow clink, ringing in my ears like a judge's gavel. A full stop to my innocence, a declaration that from this moment on, I no longer belonged here. I wanted to object. I wanted to scream that it wasn't mine, that it was all staged. But as I watched the officers quietly writing in their notebooks, as Lucky pressed his head against my leg with sorrowful eyes, I understood that my words would dissolve into nothing. The evidence had already been planted, and for the family had become the invisible sentence I was forced to bear. If you've ever been told to sacrifice for the house by trampling over the truth, you know the feeling, like the minute hand suddenly stops, trapping you in a moment that never ends. A house can swallow you whole in just one breath. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, as if my body no longer belonged to me. It wasn't until the police car door shut, cutting me off from Lucky, from the house, from the music box spinning out of tune, that my tears finally broke free. It wasn't the cry of fear, it was the cry of something shattering when you realize the very people you loved most have chosen to deliver the final blow to your last piece of trust. And that was only the beginning. The first night in the cold cell, I could clearly hear the sound of myself no longer trusting anyone. No music, no one calling my name, only the faint breath of my own body echoing within four concrete walls. The sharp sting of bleach mixed with the rusty smell of iron bars, making my throat burn as if I had just swallowed metallic dust. I sat curled up on the cold steel bed, my head leaning against the wall, listening to my heartbeat pounding like an offbeat drum in a room stripped of every sound. The fluorescent light on the ceiling flickered, blinking every few seconds as if testing my patience. My shadow spilled onto the stained cement floor, splitting into two distorted shapes, thick, then thin, as if another stranger were sitting in the cell with me. And in that silence, memories surged, lining up piece by piece like the pawns I once played with as a child. I saw Clara at the piano, her white dress billowing, a spotlight beaming down on her like a halo. That music recital our entire neighborhood came, seated neatly in rows of chairs our parents had set up in advance. I remembered preparing a small play of my own, just a few simple lines, and when I asked, "Will anyone watch?" the answer was only, "We thought you were just rehearsing." The guests' laughter drowned me out, as if I had never been there at all. At every family gathering, Clara was always the star. I was the backdrop, a stage light no one noticed. The framed photos in the living room were filled with her radiant smile. And me? Even when I appeared, it was only as a faint blur in the background. Only Lucky, our dog with eyes glowing like twin lamps, ever ran to my side, wrapping himself around my legs, choosing me, as if to whisper, "I see you." Grandpa was the only one who let me speak. I remembered that day when I was 12, sitting with him in the woodshop, the scent of pine sap still clinging to his sleeves. I told him I felt invisible, that everything at home revolved around Clara. He laid his hand gently on my shoulder and slowly replied, "You're not invisible, people are just standing in the wrong place." That sentence held me up for years afterward. But now, in this bare concrete cell, I felt myself shrinking, small as the coil of a music box wound up but never heard. I looked at my wrists, still raw and red from the cuffs. They reminded me of the moment my mother's voice cut through with accusation, my father nodding in agreement, the officers bending down, their pens cold as they scribbled my guilt. Trembling, I whispered, half to myself, "They called me family, but what family needs an exhibit?" The echo dissolved into the space around me, but for me, it carved itself into the wall, never to be erased. That night, I did not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's icy stare, heard the warped tune of the music box, and felt Lucky pressing his head into my leg, helpless. I flipped through the memories of my childhood like chess pieces lined up wrong. The more I placed them, the clearer it became, I had never been the center in that house. Once in a while, a dry cough drifted over from the neighboring cell, then faded into silence again. The guard's boots clanged against the hallway floor, ticking off seconds like the slow crawl of a clock's hand. I counted every step passing by, reminding myself I still existed, still heard, still had some part of me pushing back against the silence. But that silence roared louder than any sound, as if it were the true prison holding me, not the concrete walls. There were moments I thought I might cry, but no tears came. My body felt locked, only my mind drifting through old echoes. I heard Grandpa's soft chuckle again, Lucky's joyful bark, Clara's fingers dancing over piano keys. All of it blurred, colliding, until there was nothing left but one hollow sound: betrayal. If you've ever been placed in the role of sacrifice for the family, forced to keep quiet so the surface could stay smooth, you know that silence is never gentle. It has its own noise, a deafening quiet that shreds trust from the inside out. If this part strikes you, stay with me. The clock's hand is about to turn backward, and I'll take you to the origin. When the fluorescent light above me blinked one last time and steadied, I knew the night was nearly over. The metallic clank rang from the corridor, signaling the door would soon open. I pulled the thin blanket over my shoulders, shivering against the cold, and whispered to myself to be ready. Because the next morning, I would see my parents again, not through the bars, but in the visitation room, where the words spoken next would decide whether I could ever believe in anything again. They didn't come as parents, but as a coordination board stepping into an emergency meeting. Mom sat down across from me, back straight, eyes fixed on the stack of papers in her hand as if this were a briefing. Dad nodded in rhythm, steady, detached, just like the metronome that used to haunt me during Clara's piano lessons. In that moment, I realized they weren't here to listen, they were here to control the situation. Mom opened with an empty question, "Are they treating you well?" Her voice was gentle, but the choice of words choked me. Treating as if I were an overnight guest in a cheap motel, and she only wanted to make sure there were enough clean towels. I looked over at Dad, searching for a warm glance, but he only nodded, one beat, then another. Not a word, just mechanical motion. I drew in a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. It wasn't me. The words hit the cold metal table, echoing dryly. But they didn't react like parents. Mom only tilted her head slightly, her eyes darkening for a second, then said, "Don't make a big deal out of it." Those 3 words tore through my chest, as if the truth were nothing more than a bothersome draft to be swept under the rug. I clenched my hands so tightly the skin showed red marks where the cuffs had bitten into me. The only question left in me slipped out, what will happen to Lucky? For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I prayed for a promise, a pat on the shoulder, or even just a pause long enough to make me believe they still had a heart. But Mom answered too softly, too quickly, as if rehearsed, "He's old, don't let him wait." "Don't let him wait," those 4 words stabbed cold straight into my ears. I understood instantly, they had already decided to put Lucky down. Everything around me receded, the sounds in the room fading as if drowned underwater. And in that void, a memory sparked, the spring of my grandfather's music box, its dry but persistent clicks echoing through his woodshop when he showed me how an instrument worked. That sound became the thread that kept me from collapsing. I looked at them, forcing a crooked smile, but what came out of my mouth was a blade slicing through the air. If justice needs me to die in place of a dog, then whose justice is it? For the first time, Dad lifted his head. His eyes flickered, then quickly turned away. Mom stayed composed, but the tight press of her lips betrayed that my question had landed. They came to manage a crisis, but that single question cracked their cold facade. I didn't hear their words after that. Instead, what echoed in my mind was the clatter of Lucky's nails on the wooden floor, the familiar sound that used to wake me every morning. That sound grew louder than all the detached voices in the visitation room, pulling me back to the one thing that still kept me standing, the small but loyal love of a being they dismissed as a nuisance. If you've ever saved a small love from the decision of adults, a dog, an old keepsake, a memory others thought worthless, you know how vital that feeling is. It's not just protecting an animal or an object, it's holding on to the piece of humanity the world is trying to strip away. And if you've ever done that, you know why I sit here, in this cold visitation room, still aware that I haven't completely lost myself. The door behind me suddenly opened, and the lawyer stepped in. His coat was askew from running, the briefcase in his hand still dusty from the road. His eyes swept from me, to my parents, then back to me, as if asking, "Are you ready to fight?" I understood then that the time for family negotiation was over. It was time to find another way out, not from kinship, but from the law. And as he pulled out a chair and set the folder on the table, I drew in a long breath. The metal fixture in the corner clinked faintly, reminding me of the clamp that once cut into my wrists. But this time, that sound felt like a bell ringing at the start. I would have to face the truth and find a way to save myself, because clearly, they were no longer on my side. Attorney Harper leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Do you have any evidence?" I shook my head, a slow, drained motion, as if all strength had just been pulled out of me. At that very moment, I thought everything had ended. But then, in the heavy silence of the visitation room, I suddenly heard a faint melody rise in my mind, Claire de Lune. Not from a speaker, not from the hallway, but from memory. More precisely, from Grandpa's music box. He had once shown it to me, back when I was just a curious child. A wooden pocket clock, carved with delicate detail, but the true wonder was hidden inside its mechanism. He laughed, his hands roughened by oak, placing the box on the table, and gently lifted the lid. "Listen closely," he said, "when people say what they shouldn't, the clock will remember for us." It turned out he had built a recording mechanism into the music system. Every time the lid was opened, the box not only played Clair de Lune but also quietly captured whatever words were spoken. For him, it was a clever mechanical game. But for me now, it suddenly became the one thing that could save my life. I swallowed hard, recalling the scene from the other day. Mom had opened the living room cabinet, her hand trembling as it touched the wooden shelf. The lid of the music box had been slightly ajar, and the unfinished melody slipped out like a secret that hadn't been hidden in time. "Evidence," I whispered, as if speaking to myself. Harper frowned. "Do you have something in mind?" I didn't answer right away. I only took a deep breath, picturing each wheel in the music box turning steadily, reflecting the cold neon lights overhead, as if reminding me that time itself carried memory. I asked for a phone call. The only person I thought of was Lauren, my best friend who had walked with me through the turbulent years of youth. She still had the old keys to the house I once called mine. When the line connected, her voice burst out, startled. "Oh my God," when I heard the news I panicked. "Are you okay?" I choked. "Not okay, but I need your help. Go into the house, take the music box on the wooden shelf. And take Lucky too. Don't let anyone know." There was a brief silence on the other end. I pictured Lauren biting her lip, her hand clenched tight. Then she answered softly, but with certainty, "I'll do it. Trust me." I lowered my head onto the cold metal table, feeling a single tear fall into the crease of my clenched hand. Not a tear of despair, but the sprouting of hope in the driest soil. If they hate the truth, then let time keep it for us. In memory, I saw Grandpa again, his thin figure in a worn wool sweater, bent over his little wooden desk. The tapping of his pencil on the surface blended with the ticking of gears, creating a patient, steady rhythm. He believed no secret could stay buried forever, because something would always remember for us, whether it was ink on paper, music, or time itself. I sat there, my eyes blurred, yet inside me a small flame was rising. For the first time in many days, I felt I wasn't completely abandoned. Lauren stopped at the back steps, her hands trembling slightly but her eyes fixed straight ahead. Lucky gave a short bark, then fell silent as if he understood this wasn't the time to draw attention. The back door creaked open, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough for her to slip through. That once familiar space now carried a cold haze of schemes, as if every brick, every wooden seam had been dyed with betrayal. From the kitchen, her mother's voice came sharp and clear over the phone, "Do it fast before the preliminary hearing." Immediately after came her father's voice, short and firm, "For the house." Those two words, "for the house," fell heavily into Lauren's ears, tightening her chest. A home built to shelter had now become the excuse to destroy someone. Lauren drew a deep breath, her hand pressing lightly against her chest to steady her heartbeat. She knew she had only one chance. The familiar hallway stretched before her, once filled with Clara's childhood memories and now saturated with invisible threats. She stepped softly, her feet barely touching the wooden floor, slipping between patches of shadow and moonlight. Her eyes fixed on the wooden pocket watch hanging neatly on the wall, its lid slightly ajar like a half-closed eyelid. The unfinished notes of Clair de Lune still lingered in the air, and she knew this place was holding a truth. She reached out, carefully lifting it from its hook. The wood was ice cold, as if testing her courage. Lucky brushed against her leg, his tail wagging once before he stilled again. Like a loyal ally, he shared this tense moment with her. Lauren pressed the music box tight against her chest, feeling her heartbeat sync with its ticking as if time itself was confirming it had recorded everything. Footsteps echoed from the staircase. Clara. Lauren's heart leapt into her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, one hand gripping Lucky, the other clutching the watch. Clara descended, her heels striking in dry, hollow beats, each one dragging like an invisible torment. Lauren held her breath, waiting until the sound faded. And then silence. In that moment, she gently closed the lid of the music box. A soft click sounded, delicate yet enough to make her heart tremble. It was the signal that the mission was complete, that time had finished recording its part. Lauren moved quickly toward the door, Lucky close behind, his long tail brushing against the frame. Dust rose into the slant of fading sunlight at the threshold, glittering like floating grains of time, witnessing everything, but never betraying memory. She clutched the box tighter in her hand, silently vowing, "Loyalty is when your hands tremble yet still hold tight to the truth." The words echoed in her mind like a secret pact among those who still believed in what was right. Stepping out of that house, Lauren knew the line between danger and safety was as thin as the winding spring stretched taut inside the music box. One slip, one heavy breath, and it could all shatter. But she kept moving, because loyalty would not allow her to stop. If you've ever been someone's Lauren, the one who risked herself quietly to guard the truth for them, then this story is grateful to you. Because not everyone has the courage to walk through that door with nothing but an old music box and a loyal dog at their side. The next day, in the pretrial conference room, the clock lay in the center of the table, silent yet proud. It was no longer just an object, but a witness of time, of loyalty, and of a truth that could never be buried. And from here, the story turned to a new chapter where the truth began to emerge into the light. The courtroom that day was lit by harsh, cold fluorescent lights, but the air felt thick, heavy, as if even the dust motes had stopped moving to listen. I sat in the back row, my hands clenched so tightly together that my fingertips tingled. In front of me stretched the long table where the prosecutor, the attorneys, and my family sat, about to face evidence that could no longer be denied. Harper, the quietest ally, stood up. In his hand was the pocket watch Lauren had brought out from the house the night before. The room fell almost deathly silent as Harper placed it on the table, turned the lid, and revealed the small music box hidden inside. The gears began to turn. First came a faint tinkling, the sound of porcelain cups touching saucers, fragile yet echoing across the wide room. An ordinary sound, but in this context, it became a blade slicing through deception. Then, my mother's voice. Clear, steady, cold. Bottom drawer, have it done before nightfall. A short pause, then my father's voice, low and rough as whetstone. Evelyn will soften soon enough. I felt the entire room flinch at once. But it wasn't over. A third voice followed, so familiar it made me want to cover my ears and yet unable to escape it. Clara. Once this is done, the house will be mine. Those words echoed, tearing the air apart. In an instant, the room plunged into absolute silence. I could even hear the prosecutor's pen touch down on the wooden table, such a small sound, yet it rang like a verdict. My mother's face turned ghostly pale, her trembling hand rising to adjust a scarf that needed no adjusting, her eyes darting away from anyone's gaze. My father lowered his head, staring at the edge of the table as if he looked long enough, a hole would open for him to crawl into. And Clara, my sister, let out a sharp, derisive laugh at first, as though clinging to the confidence that had once let her twist any family situation in her favor. But then her voice cracked, rising with fury. She always plays the victim. The echo of those words slammed against the walls before vanishing into silence, leaving behind a bitterness that seemed to shrink the very room. And in that moment, I realized, a family that needs a director of lies to survive is not a home, it's just a film crew. The prosecutor leaned forward, his eyes fixed on me. He didn't need to say a word, the evidence had already spoken. The second hand of the watch ticked on, its glass face reflecting each person around the table. I saw myself in that reflection, still trembling, but no longer hiding. Clara bit her lip until it bled, her eyes darting wildly for escape. My mother folded her hands, not in prayer but to conceal her twitching fingers. My father crossed his arms, his shoulders sagging under a weight now stripped bare. Then suddenly, Harper snapped the music box shut. A sharp click cut through the room, final and absolute, like the hard line under a sentence. And with it, the entire room fell silent again. I didn't need to scream, or cry, or explain. Everything was already so clear that no one could deny it anymore. What I carried with me wasn't revenge, but truth preserved by time, now finally given voice. I remembered the nights I had asked myself whether anyone would ever believe me, whether my voice could ever hold against a wall of family silence. And now, with a single press of play, every mask had fallen. I didn't need to shout. The truth knew how to defend itself. At the far end of the room, a court officer cleared his throat softly, a reminder that time hadn't stopped. But for me, this moment carved itself into memory. It didn't just expose deceit, it gave me something precious, the relief of knowing I no longer carried the burden alone. Harper placed the watch into the evidence box. His eyes met mine, and no words were needed. In that look was an acknowledgement, we had done it. The prosecutor nodded, stacking his papers. The scrape of chairs followed, signaling the meeting's end. But I knew this was only the beginning. If you've ever wanted to see justice carried through to the very end, stay. Because this journey isn't over, and truth deserves the light until the final moment. That day, the judge announced the official trial date. And this time, I sat up straight. No more lowered head, no more hiding in shadows. Because truth was finally on my side. That trial was oddly short. No more back and forth, no more averted eyes like in the pre-hearing. Only the prosecutor stood, his voice ringing clear through the microphone, each word striking down onto the cold wooden floor. The evidence was replayed, the recording, the undeniable words. Then came the fingerprints, etched onto the zip bag where the forged documents had been hidden. Every final link closed in, leaving no cracks behind. Clara lowered her head, lips trembling, and finally released the two words I had once waited for but now found no comfort in, I admit. She was convicted of collusion and defamation. Her voice no longer carried its old sharpness, only the frayed sound of a string just snapped. My parents, sitting beside her, could not escape their own verdicts. They were found guilty of obstruction of justice and perjury. My father, once cloaked in cold pride, now looked like nothing more than a bent shadow at the witness stand. And my mother, she did not cry, did not beg, she sat rigid, eyes wide open yet utterly empty. Not a single one of them turned to me. Not a single glance sought forgiveness. I sat there, back straight, my heart quiet as a lake after a storm. I had thought I would burst apart, that I would cry or scream when I heard them plead guilty. But I didn't. What remained was only hollowness, a void no apology could ever fill. When the trial ended, I walked out into the hallway. The corridor stretched long, late afternoon light pouring in through narrow windows, pulling our shadows into long trails across the tiles. There, Grandpa Samuel was already waiting. He didn't say much, just clasped my hand, his own gnarled but warm. I changed the will into a trust, he said, his voice low yet steady, before they had the chance to ask. The house is still the house, but only when it's in the right hands. I froze. Those words were more than comfort, they were a declaration. The house, the thing they had wrapped in the name of family to claw over, was now protected, no longer a weapon to be used. And then one line flared inside me, sharper than anything else. They said it was for family, but it turns out, they were talking about a house. I drew in a long breath, as if for the first time in years my lungs were filled with air untainted. Justice had arrived not with tearful embraces, but with verdicts on paper, with stamps and signatures that cornered lies with no escape. When I stepped down the old wooden courthouse stairs, the evening sun spread wide, gilding each worn step. In the yard, Lucky the rescue dog I had brought home lay sprawled in the warmth, chest rising and falling in steady breaths. That image struck me with a quiet kind of peace, the kind I had thought forever beyond reach. I paused, watching Lucky, then lifted my gaze to the door of my house ahead. In that moment, I understood, justice is not comfort. It doesn't soothe wounds overnight, nor hand me instant happiness. But it is a foundation solid, real, enough to let me stand tall and move forward. Justice has a shape. It is stamped files, a gavel struck, a sentence that makes the guilty bow their heads. It is not a vague promise, not something used to pacify. And because of that, it matters. Maybe you once thought justice was a distant idea. But sitting there, hearing the rustle of documents through the prosecutor's hands, watching the faces that once denied me now forced to bow, I knew justice was real. Not abstract, but tangible. And it had chosen to stand by me. If you too believe that justice must have a concrete form, don't leave your screen. Because what just happened was only half the journey. Because justice, however crucial, only handles the outside. The rest, the boundaries I still had to learn to draw for myself, against those who once called themselves my family. I turned to glance back at the courthouse, then walked on, letting the last light of day guide me. On the steps, Lucky lifted his head, wagged his tail, as if to remind me that whatever remains now lies in my hands. I moved into Grandpa's house, the one that still carried the smell of old wood mixed with dried apples Grandma used to hang in the kitchen. The attic room had been empty for years, so I decided to fix it up. I replaced the faded floral wallpaper Grandma once loved, its color a little pale, but soft enough to make the room feel gentle, as if someone was still whispering in the corners of the house. When I pulled the wooden desk closer to the window, I realized this would be the place where I'd write, study, and maybe begin a new rhythm of life. Lucky was clearly aging. He no longer ran around with the same joy, instead stretching out on the floor, lifting his head every time I moved. At night, he rested his paws across my legs as I slept, his slow breathing like a second heartbeat in the quiet room. Sometimes I startled at the thought that maybe peace didn't need much at all, just a room bright enough, a loyal dog, and a night's sleep free of nightmares. One day, I received a letter from Clara. The envelope was thick, the handwriting shaky, as if every stroke of the pen was trying to prove regret. I read it once, then placed it in the drawer beside Grandpa Samuel's photo and the old watch he left me. I didn't tear it up, and I didn't reply. I understood, forgiveness was not a mail transaction. Forgiveness was a silent decision, happening inside my heart, needing no acknowledgement. In that attic room, I also placed the music box again. This time, I opened it not to record, but just to listen. The tune played, its tone unchanged, but it no longer sounded sad. It felt like a reminder, what had happened belonged to the past, and I had the right to choose the melody for the present. I began studying again, enrolling in a community law class at the nearby school. The lecture hall wasn't big, mostly rows of plastic chairs, a worn whiteboard still faintly stained with ink. But I sat there, pen in hand, filled with determination. I studied to understand, so I could help those who had been like me, those with no music box beside them, no one to record their voices, no one to stand by their side. I knew that if I could use that knowledge to become a voice for them, then this journey would finally hold true meaning. One day, a classmate asked me, "Did you forgive them already?" I looked at them, smiled, and simply answered, "I didn't forgive so they could be at peace, I forgave so I could be at peace." The words slipped out lightly, but I knew they marked my new boundary. Forgiveness didn't mean opening the door for them to return, nor did it erase what they had done. It only meant I no longer allowed that wound to control me for another single day. Every morning, when I opened the window, I saw Grandpa's little garden blooming again. Sunlight filtered through the pale floral curtains, scattering shimmering patches of light across my desk. I realized some things didn't need to be rebuilt with bricks and mortar, but with the choice of where we let our hearts rest. And my heart, after so many storms, had finally found a home. If you've ever chosen silence so that your peace could speak louder, then this story is yours. Because silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, it's the only way to protect the calm you fought so hard to find. I know the journey isn't over. There's still one thing I owe myself, to say it out loud, and then set it down. Because only when I speak it into the world will I truly release what has been locked away inside me for far too long. I stepped into the house that had once been filled with whispers and plotted schemes. This time, no rush, no fear, only a steady breath and a clear resolve. In my hand was the music box. I set it on the mantel, wound it once, and opened the lid. The familiar sound rose woodpecker chirps blended with notes of Debussy spilling into the old room like a reminder that some memories cannot be distorted. I looked around the four walls that had witnessed countless arguments, avoided glances, and staged family dramas. But this time, I didn't need apologies, I didn't need a healing reunion plan. I only whispered, as if speaking to myself, "I've grown up." The words fell into the air, met no response, but echoed in my heart as a declaration. No more verdicts hanging over me, no more papers deciding on my behalf. I had signed the trust documents with the lawyer, handed the spare key back to Grandpa Samuel, the only one who had always placed truth and family above everything. Lucky lay at the foot of the chair, softly snoring, as if he understood that the weight had finally been put down. That evening, I wrote a letter to myself from 10 years ago. Don't wait at the back door. Walk straight through the front. If they won't open it, find your own key. I folded the letter, tucked it into a small notebook. It wasn't a piece of advice, but a gift to the past to remind myself I was never truly alone on this journey. When I closed the lid of the music box, the sound played once more, then faded. No longer evidence, no longer fuel for conflict. This time, it was only music. They wanted to erase me from the family time has etched them into guilt. The late sun slipped through the window, resting quietly on the old wood. Lucky sneezed softly in his sleep, and I realized, silence is sometimes the way justice answers. Dear my friends, if this story reminds you of a boundary that needs to be drawn, leave a note not to name anyone, but to remind yourself that you deserve a sky of peace where no one has the right to intrude. And if you believe that justice doesn't just lie on papers, but in every choice we make to live truthfully, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and press subscribe to walk this path with us. This is not just a storytelling channel, but a place where we remind each other, time always stands with the truth.